The rain tapped against the cold glass of my apartment window. Outside, the city was quiet, except for the distant hum of holiday traffic and the occasional crack of a car skidding over wet asphalt. I was curled up on the sofa, wrapped in a heavy blanket, still feeling the last lingering chills of a 2-week flu that had left me weak and hollow. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, breaking the silence, a group call. From my family. I hesitated before swiping. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let them continue living in the illusion that I was unimportant. But another part, the stubborn human part, couldn't resist. "Scarlett, dear." My mother's voice started, calm but brittle, the kind of voice that always preceded disaster. "We need to talk about Christmas." My chest tightened. My muscles ached from the flu, my head still heavy with fog, but none of that compared to the cold lump forming in my stomach. I knew, even before she said a word, that this wasn't going to be a friendly conversation. I remembered the Christmases of my childhood. The lights twinkling on the tree, the smell of my mother's casseroles wafting through the house, the laughter that always felt just out of reach for me, because no matter how hard I tried, I could never be the favorite, the perfect one. That title was reserved for Claire, my sister, the sparkling one, the one who could do no wrong, and here I was, at 36, still feeling like the invisible daughter. The phone call was proof. My parents, my sister, even the extended family, they had already decided I didn't deserve a place at their table this year. "We've decided it's not a good year for you to come home," my mother said, carefully measured, each word cutting sharper than the last. "Claire's situation. It's very important this year." I blinked, staring at the phone as if it could change what I was hearing. Not come home? After weeks of carefully wrapped presents, after flying hundreds of miles, after planning my trip to finally see them, I was suddenly unwanted. Claire's voice chimed in, loud and precise, her sneer audible even through the microphone. "He doesn't like nobodies, Scarlett. He moves in circles. You just wouldn't understand. Nobody." That word, casual, venomous, settled like ice in my veins. I sank deeper into my blanket. The flu had left me weak, but this was different. This was a hollowing out, a new kind of ache that no medicine could touch. I thought about the life I had built in secret, the quiet, relentless work that my family never knew about. I had spent the last decade building something extraordinary while they assumed I was failing. The very home they were so concerned about embarrassing had been financed quietly by me over the years. The mortgage, the vlogging equipment for Claire, even the luxuries they attributed to my father's clever investments. I had provided without recognition, without gratitude, yet here I was, painted as a nobody. I stared at the stack of gifts by my door. Expensive, carefully chosen, filled with thought and care, and now their rejection hung over them like a storm cloud. Christmases had always been a performance in my family. My mother, perfect in pearls and sequins, directing the scene. My father, always the quiet observer, nodding at the right moments. Claire, radiant and adored. And me? I learned early that being practical, responsible, quiet, and talented meant nothing in their hierarchy. I remembered one Christmas vividly. I had saved my allowance for weeks to buy a small present for my sister. I wrapped it with care, stayed up late polishing it, imagining her delight. On Christmas morning, she tore open the gift, glanced at it with thinly veiled disinterest, and then laughed, a high, tinkling laugh, before turning to my mother. "She's so predictable, isn't she?" Claire said. Predictable. Boring. Invisible. I learned that day that even when I gave everything, it could never be enough. I shook my head, pulling myself back to the present. That Scarlett, the overlooked, underestimated girl, was gone. I was no longer invisible. I had built Terra Global Strategies from the ground up, quietly, consulting for Fortune 100 companies, leading a team of brilliant executives, making deals worth millions. And yet my family knew none of it. They still assumed I was struggling in a small office job. The irony was sharp, almost cruel. The very people who dismissed me had unwittingly created the stage for my ultimate advantage. And I knew it. I let the phone fall silent. I didn't need them to see me upset. I didn't need their approval. I only needed one thing: clarity. The anger simmered beneath the surface, cold and precise. It was not the anger of a child hurt by rejection. It was the controlled, calculated anger of someone who had spent years underestimated and someone who had the power to reveal truths in ways that words alone could never achieve. I imagined walking into their living room on Christmas Day, quietly, with dignity, calm, no tantrums, no shouting, just presence. And when the moment came, the revelation would speak for itself. I didn't yet know how it would unfold. I didn't yet know if my sister's boyfriend would recognize me or if my parents would finally connect the dots. But I knew one thing. They were about to learn that the quiet, practical, boring girl they had dismissed was the very person they had been hoping to impress with their upper-class fantasies. The trap was simple. My life, my success, my choices, all invisible to them until now. And when I showed up, everything they thought they controlled would unravel. They don't know me yet, I whispered to myself, feeling a shiver of anticipation. They have no idea who is walking through that door. The night before Christmas, the city lights glimmered like shards of glass against the wet streets. My apartment smelled faintly of pine from a tiny tree I had put up, a small gesture to feel close to the holidays without the family chaos. I packed carefully, a mix of gifts for tradition and a different kind of gift, evidence of everything I had quietly done for them over the years. Each item placed in my bag was a statement. Each decision, a calculated step toward the ultimate moment of revelation. I closed the door behind me and took a deep breath. Outside, the wind howled, shaking loose the last leaves of autumn. Inside, I felt a rare clarity. Calm, focused, unstoppable. This wasn't just Christmas. This was the moment everything changed, and so I boarded the plane the next morning. I didn't tell them I was coming. I didn't ask for permission. I didn't need it. The world outside my window was cold, wet, and gray, but inside me burned a quiet fire. The story that was about to unfold would not be one of tantrums or childish revenge. It would be a story of dignity, revelation, and power. A story that would remind them, and perhaps everyone watching, that sometimes the quietest ones are the ones building empires, and the invisible can become unforgettable. And as the wheels lifted off the runway, my mind was already there, in that living room, where their disbelief would finally meet the truth. The taxi pulled up in front of my childhood home. Snow had started falling lightly, coating the manicured hedges and the familiar driveway with a soft white layer. The house looked unchanged, pristine, perfect, untouched by time, just as I remembered it. But I knew better. The perfection was only skin deep, a carefully curated illusion meant to hide the cracks, the lies, the favoritism. I stepped out, my coat heavy against the cold. I could see through the large front windows, the twinkling tree, my mother adjusting the ornaments with meticulous care, and Claire, radiant in a red sweater, laughing at something I couldn't hear. And then the boyfriend, tall, smirking, looking exactly like he belonged in a glossy holiday card. I hesitated. My mother had said I would embarrass them. My sister had mocked me. But instead of retreating, I straightened my spine and smiled. Faint, controlled, unnervingly calm. This was not the Scarlet who had been dismissed all her life. This was the Scarlet they had ignored at their peril. The door opened before I could knock. My mother's eyes widened slightly, the perfect mask slipping just enough to show surprise. "Scarlet, you're here?" she asked, her voice tight. I stepped inside, letting the door close behind me. "Yes, Mother," I said softly. "I'm here. For Christmas." Polished silverware, perfectly arranged dishes, a table lit by candlelight, and everyone sitting according to some invisible hierarchy. At the center was Claire, sparkling, radiant, clearly the star of the show. My mother hovered nearby, guiding every movement, every smile, every laugh. And me? I was the ghost in the room, the invisible daughter. But not for long. Claire's eyes flicked toward me, just for a second, with what I could only describe as controlled annoyance. "You actually came," she whispered, loud enough for me to hear. Her boyfriend smirked, nudging her lightly, whispering something that made her giggle. I ignored it, placing my coat over the back of the chair and taking my seat, deliberately, unyielding, fully present. "I wasn't sure you'd make it," my mother said, forcing a smile. Her hands trembled slightly as she passed the bread. I nodded politely. "Traffic was difficult," I said, letting the casual tone mask the storm inside. As we started dinner, I observed. Every gesture, every glance, every subtle interaction revealed the unspoken hierarchy. My sister dominated the conversation. My mother reinforced it. My father occasionally chuckled at her jokes, a silent accomplice. And I? I was supposed to fade into the background, but I didn't. I listened. I remembered. I calculated. Every tiny slight, every dismissive word, every instance of favoritism. It all went into a mental ledger, one I intended to balance soon enough. The evening drifted, and my mind wandered to past Christmases. I saw myself, a little girl, standing in the corner while Claire received every compliment, every attention, every token of praise. I remembered one Christmas vividly, when I had stayed up late making a handmade gift for my father. I had carved each detail carefully, polished it with wax, wrapped it in soft paper. On Christmas morning, he opened it, smiled politely, and said, "Thank you, Scarlett." Very thoughtful. Then he turned to Claire, who had received an elaborate gift she hadn't even asked for, and gushed over her exuberantly. I had clutched my gift, staring at it, wishing it was larger, brighter, more impressive, anything to make them notice me. I realized then that my invisibility had been cemented long before I left home. The lessons were subtle but unyielding. The quiet, thoughtful, hard-working child was less worthy than the charming, flashy one. The nobody I had been called. And yet, all those years of being overlooked had forged something stronger: resilience, patience, and a hidden brilliance they would never see coming. As dinner progressed, the tension thickened. Claire kept throwing pointed comments at me, testing the boundaries, seeing if the old patterns still worked. "I didn't know you were coming." "I thought you'd rather spend Christmas alone," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. I smiled politely, the corner of my lips lifting just enough to make her pause. "I enjoy surprises," I said softly, letting my calm presence do the work that anger could never achieve. Her boyfriend leaned in, smirking again. "Boss, what are you doing here?" The words froze the room. My mother blinked, her perfect mask cracking slightly. My sister's laughter stumbled, catching in her throat. I held their gazes calmly, letting the weight of recognition settle. The boss wasn't just a joke. It was a reminder of everything they had dismissed. The quiet, unassuming girl they had underestimated for decades had grown into someone who commanded rooms and respect. I allowed myself a moment of reflection. This was not revenge in the childish sense. This was revelation. Every glance, every word, every reaction in that room was part of a carefully orchestrated symphony. I thought of my father, who had always been the quiet observer. Would he recognize the Scarlett who had quietly built empires while he assumed I was struggling? My mother, the perfectionist who had curated every holiday detail, every family interaction. Would she finally see the daughter she had overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed? And Claire. Oh, Claire. She had ruled the room for years, assuming her charm and beauty were enough to overshadow me. But she was about to learn that charm could not compete with substance. Substance, skill, and calm confidence. Things she had mocked and never understood. Every memory of invisibility, every insult and slight had led to this moment. And now I was present, quiet but undeniable, invisible no longer. As dinner ended, the room felt heavy with unspoken tension. My gifts were placed neatly under the tree, my presence noted and yet incompletely understood by those who had long assumed they held power over me. I saw the subtle shifts. My mother's hand trembled slightly as she adjusted a decoration. My father's eyes lingered a moment too long on my posture. My sister's forced smile faltered under the weight of recognition. The boyfriend, still smirking, didn't yet fully grasp who I was. But soon he would. The night was far from over. This was only the beginning of a carefully constructed unveiling, a slow burn designed to expose truth, reveal hidden strengths, and ultimately, force acknowledgement from the family that had always dismissed me. And as I went upstairs to my old room, now just a guest room for the night, I allowed myself a quiet smile. Tomorrow everything would change. The first morning in the house arrived quietly, with frost still clinging to the edges of the windows. The aroma of fresh coffee and baked goods drifted from the kitchen. I had chosen to sleep in late, allowing the world to wake without me. It was a subtle strategy, presence without rush, a calm before the storm. Downstairs, the family was already in motion. Claire moved through the kitchen like she owned it, laughing, chatting, receiving subtle praise from my mother. The boyfriend hovered, clearly attempting to charm, unaware that the room's dynamics had shifted overnight. I descended the stairs slowly, letting each step be noticed, my coat draped elegantly over one arm, my expression calm, deliberate. The subtle recognition in my mother's eyes was immediate, a flicker, brief, but enough to set the tone for the day. "Good morning," I said softly, smiling faintly at my sister. She froze, mid-pour of orange juice, her grin faltering. "Morning," she muttered, forced, as if my very presence had interrupted her carefully curated holiday perfection. I poured myself coffee and moved to the window, pretending to admire the snow, all while observing every nuance of behavior, every glance, every subtle shift, every calculated avoidance. I was invisible no longer. Breakfast became a battlefield of glances and microaggressions. Claire attempted to dominate the conversation, filling it with jokes at my expense, subtle digs disguised as humor. "Did you even find a parking spot, or were you lost again?" she teased, smirking. I smiled politely, calm, measured. It was a bit tricky, yes, but I managed. The words carried no apology, no defensiveness, only quiet confidence. The table fell into a brief, uncomfortable silence. The boyfriend tried to laugh, but it sounded hollow, unsteady. My mother busied herself with refilling cups, clearly unsettled by the tension she had underestimated. This subtle shift, almost imperceptible, was the beginning of the day's conflict. I had learned long ago that power in these rooms was not won by shouting, but by presence, by letting others stumble into recognition of their own underestimation. Every small action mattered. The way I reached for the butter, the way I leaned slightly toward my mother while discussing plans for the day, the calm, assured way I addressed everyone without giving weight to their provocations. Claire's composure began to crack as the day progressed. Her carefully crafted image, charming, untouchable, queen of the holiday, started to falter. When my mother suggested a small family walk outside, Claire attempted to insist that I remain behind, under the guise of wanting private sister time. "I don't think Scarlett wants to walk with us. She probably has better things to do," she said, trying to redirect attention to herself. I smiled faintly. "Actually, I enjoy fresh air. It will be a lovely walk." Her face flushed slightly, the forced smile faltering. The boyfriend glanced between us, sensing tension but not understanding its depth. My mother hesitated, unsure which daughter to placate, a sign of shifting dynamics. It was a small victory, but significant. The first crack in the armor had appeared, and I could sense that Claire's dominance was beginning to feel threatened. Later, as we decorated the tree together, Claire attempted another subtle attack. "You always try to steal the spotlight, even with the tree," she said, laughing lightly, "but with sharp edges." I stopped hanging ornaments for a moment, looking her directly in the eye. "I'm simply participating, Claire. Is that a problem?" The room froze. Even the boyfriend didn't have a response. his usual smirk replaced by uncertainty. My mother, sensing the shift, coughed softly, trying to redirect the energy. I realized then that my strategy was working. I didn't need to confront with anger, just with calm presence and measured words. The power dynamics were tilting subtly, almost imperceptibly, and Claire could feel it. Each ornament I placed, each comment I made, was deliberate, a silent assertion of presence, a demonstration that I belonged, that my existence could no longer be ignored or minimized. Upstairs later, I allowed myself a quiet moment of reflection. The day had been a series of calculated moves, subtle, strategic, invisible maneuvers. I had let them underestimate me once more, only to remind them of my power with a single word, a single gesture. Claire would remember the way I had remained calm, controlled, unfazed by her attempts to provoke. My mother would remember the way I had subtly shifted attention without raising my voice. The boyfriend, who had mocked me as boss in jest, would realize that my authority was quiet, undeniable, and real. I thought about the rest of the week ahead. Every meal, every gathering, every seemingly insignificant moment would be another opportunity to reveal truths, expose insecurities, and reclaim the recognition I had been denied for decades. And I knew, somewhere in the back of my mind, that by the time Christmas ended, the family's perception of me would be irrevocably changed. By evening, the tension in the house was palpable. The family had started to feel the weight of my presence. Conversations that had once flowed smoothly now stumbled, faltered, shifted awkwardly. Claire was cautious, her laughter forced, her jabs less frequent. The boyfriend avoided eye contact more than once, unsure how to navigate the subtle power shift. My mother busied herself in the kitchen, pretending nothing had changed, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her unease. My father, ever the observer, seemed to study me quietly, his expression unreadable, but thoughtful. And me? I remained calm, controlled, seated at the table with deliberate grace. I was the invisible daughter no longer. The boss had arrived quietly, yet undeniably, and the storm had only just begun. By mid-afternoon, the house was buzzing with holiday chatter. Claire had invited friends of her boyfriend over, creating a subtle hierarchy in the room. Insiders versus outsiders. My presence had shifted the balance entirely. The moment I entered the living room, all eyes subtly shifted. Claire, who had been in control of the room for years, suddenly faltered. Her forced smile betrayed her anxiety, and she nervously adjusted her jewelry, a small but telling gesture. "Scarlett, you're still here," she said, her voice tight. "I thought you'd left for a spa or something." I smiled faintly. "I'm enjoying the holiday. It's peaceful here." Her boyfriend, Julian, who had been quietly observing, glanced at me with a flicker of recognition. Confusion first, then dawning realization. The term boss from the previous day lingered between us, unspoken yet present. Claire's attempts to assert dominance escalated as she tried to redirect conversation. She brought up my so-called office job, aiming to belittle me subtly in front of the guests. "Oh, Scarlett's still working at that. Small firm, right?" she said with a condescending smile. I met her gaze steadily, my calm confidence turning the insult back on her. "Actually, I've recently completed a major project that secured our firm's international expansion. You might not have seen the headlines." The room froze. The friends exchanged glances, unsure how to respond. Claire's mask of control cracked slightly, her hand trembling as she reached for a glass of water. Julian's eyes narrowed, a spark of curiosity and admiration flickering as he pieced together the truth behind the quiet woman standing before him. The next strategic move came at the gift exchange. I had carefully curated gifts that highlighted the reality of my contributions. A rare book for my mother, a luxury watch for my father, and a subtle, ironic gift for Claire, a symbolic reminder of her dependence. As gifts were exchanged, I watched reactions closely. Claire's hand trembled as she opened her package, revealing the evidence of my generosity and her oblivious reliance. Her gasp was audible, her composure slipping further. Julian's gaze shifted between us, the puzzle pieces forming. The quiet, underestimated sister was far more than she appeared. He leaned slightly forward, his interest piqued, silent acknowledgement in his eyes that the family's narrative was unraveling. Finally, Claire could no longer contain her frustration. She confronted me in the kitchen, voice rising, eyes wild. "You think you can just walk in here and ruin everything?" she hissed. I remained calm, measured. "I'm not ruining anything. I'm simply present. You've built a fantasy, Claire, and it's fragile." Her hands shook, the first real sign of vulnerability in years. "You don't understand. Mom, Dad, Julian. They need to see me as someone important." "They're seeing reality, not your illusion," I replied softly. The words cut deeper than any raised voice ever could. Claire staggered back, the emotional weight finally sinking in. At that precise moment, Julian stepped forward. The polite mask he had worn all afternoon slipped as he addressed Claire directly. "Claire, what exactly is going on here?" he asked, voice calm but firm. Claire floundered, unable to fabricate a coherent story. I watched, quietly satisfied, as the narrative she had constructed for years collapsed. Julian's gaze met mine, a silent acknowledgement that he understood. The underestimated sister was far more formidable than anyone had imagined. The room fell into a tense silence. My parents, who had attempted to maintain control, looked on in shock, suddenly aware of how completely the power dynamics had shifted. Later that evening, I retreated briefly to my suite, allowing myself a moment to reflect. The first confrontation had been successful, subtle, deliberate, and undeniable. The family had been shaken, Claire's mask had slipped, and Julian had begun to see the truth. Yet, I knew the battle was only beginning. Christmas was far from over, and each gathering, each meal, each conversation would offer another opportunity, another chance to reveal the depth of the family's misjudgments, and to assert the recognition I had long been denied. By the time the holiday ended, the consequences would be irreversible, and I, finally, would no longer be the invisible, underestimated daughter. I would be the force that redefined the family's understanding of power, influence, and respect. The morning after the confrontation, the house was eerily quiet. Claire's earlier panic had escalated overnight. She avoided eye contact, her usual charm nowhere to be found. I observed from the corner, calm and composed, watching the family stumble in the aftermath of their own machinations. My parents whispered nervously in the hallway, reassessing the reality they had dismissed for years. Every glance, every misstep, was a subtle acknowledgement of the truths they had ignored. Julian remained politely distant, strategically silent, though the flicker of recognition in his eyes told me he understood exactly who I was. He had seen the invisible daughter rise, unannounced, uninvited, and undeniable. I had prepared my next move carefully. The notarized accounting of all expenditures, the truth of my generosity and their dependence, sat in the elegant holiday gift bag. It wasn't just evidence. It was the final, undeniable proof that the nobody in the room had been the family's silent benefactor for years. As I handed the folder to my parents, their expressions changed from mild confusion to shock, to disbelief. Every page, every entry, every documented payment shattered the illusions they had created for themselves. "Scarlett, this can't be right," my mother stammered. "It is right," I replied softly, every word deliberate. Every vlogging, trip, every luxury item, every mortgage payment, funded quietly by me. "You knew nothing because you never cared to see the reality." Claire's face drained of color. She had no words, only the sinking realization that her facade had crumbled completely. The room became a courtroom of its own making. Julian stepped forward, his calm authority amplifying the impact of my revelations. "Claire, you presented an illusion," he said, voice firm. "Your family attempted to impress me with status and performance. Scarlett, however, is the one who built the reality. She is your CEO, your benefactor, and the architect of your comfortable life. And you lied about her? Claire's lips trembled. I didn't. You did, Julian interrupted, his tone sharp. And now you see the consequences. The shock radiated outward. My parents turned pale, their carefully constructed world collapsing. They had underestimated the quiet, practical daughter for far too long, failing to see the power behind her calm exterior. With the family in disarray, I made my next move. My position as CEO was no longer secret, and the power dynamics had shifted irreversibly. I calmly explained my role, my company's achievements, and the scope of my influence, not to boast, but to restore clarity. Julian confirmed every detail. I have worked directly with Ms. Vance. Her leadership is unparalleled, and this family, unaware of her contributions, attempted to diminish her. That stops now. The silence was thick, the realization devastating. My parents, who had long treated me as a background figure, finally faced the truth. Scarlett Vance was no longer invisible, no longer underestimated. The aftermath was inevitable. Claire's social media career collapsed as the truth about her dependence on me spread quietly among mutual contacts. My parents' control over the family narrative had been stripped, and I, for the first time in my life, felt the liberating clarity of justice served without vengeance, simply through truth and competence. I reflected on the path that had brought me here, the years of patience, the careful observation, the quiet resilience. The confrontation was not about humiliation. It was about recognition, validation, and reclaiming authority in a family that had long denied me my rightful place. By the end of the holiday, a new tradition had begun, one defined not by appearances or social status, but by authenticity and mutual respect. Julian remained a respectful presence, observing but never overshadowing, while I solidified my role as both a leader in my professional life and a figure demanding acknowledgement in my personal life. The family had been forced to reconcile with the reality they had ignored. The quiet daughter, the practical daughter, the nobody, was the one who held the keys to their comfort and success. And with that realization, the unspoken hierarchy had shifted permanently. The confrontation had left my parents and sister in stunned silence. Julian had exited the room, leaving behind a tension so thick it felt like glass. I took a deep breath, absorbing the magnitude of the moment. Years of being invisible, dismissed, and underestimated had led to this precise point. I walked slowly to the foyer, collecting the gifts I had prepared. Each one symbolized a truth, a calculated reminder of what had been done in secret for their comfort and luxury. My leather-bound notarized financial report was the crown jewel, the proof of my quiet labor, my silent generosity. I placed the report prominently on the table, ensuring that no one could ignore it. The weight of the evidence matched the weight of my years of patience. Every dollar spent, every sacrifice made, was now undeniable, visible, and final. Margaret's face was pale, her carefully constructed aura of control crumbling with every passing second. Richard's hands trembled as he adjusted his tie, searching desperately for a justification that didn't exist. Scarlett. How? My mother whispered. I didn't ask for recognition, I said, my voice steady and calm. I didn't ask to be seen. I just wanted to help. The full truth hit them like a storm. They realized their entire narrative of the nobody daughter, the dull, boring one, had been false. Their reliance on me had been total, yet invisible. Their shame and fear of embarrassment had blinded them to reality. Claire was frozen, her carefully curated image shattering. Her vlog career, funded entirely by me, was suddenly exposed as a dependency, not an achievement. Her social capital evaporated in the face of truth. I turned to Julian, who had remained the epitome of calm professionalism. His respect for my authority, long established behind the scenes, now translated into visible acknowledgement. This is not about punishment, I said, addressing my family. This is about clarity. The truth has weight. It deserves acknowledgement, and now you have it. Julian nodded silently, a quiet validation of the power shift. The family could no longer hide behind illusions of status or social games. Their deception had failed spectacularly. I left no room for argument. The annuity, the trust payments, Claire's allowance, the mortgage, all will be adjusted to reflect reality. No more hiding. No more manipulation. This is the final accounting. My parents swallowed, powerless. Claire's face was a mixture of disbelief and humiliation. I felt no satisfaction in their discomfort, only a serene sense of justice. The final triumph was not only about exposing the family, it was about reclaiming my autonomy. I established boundaries with every decision carefully communicated. Claire would receive a minimal allowance and a chance to support herself honestly. My parents would retain ownership of their home but without access to my finances. I would continue my work with Julian, expanding my firm internationally without interference. The lesson was simple. Empowerment comes not from revenge, but from clarity and authority. I had navigated years of invisibility and underestimation, and now I controlled my narrative completely. The family could react, beg, or apologize, but the power dynamic had permanently shifted. I was no longer the overlooked daughter. I was the architect of my own destiny. Weeks later, I was standing on the rooftop terrace of my Singapore office, overlooking the city skyline I had helped make more sustainable. Julian raised a glass. "To Scarlett, the boss," he said. Smiling. "To knowing your real family," I corrected gently, clinking my glass against his. The city lights shimmered like a promise, a future unbound by past betrayal. I had walked away from shame, misunderstanding, and manipulation. I had embraced the truth, and with it my full potential. No apologies were needed, no reconciliation required. I had found freedom in clarity, respect in truth, and victory in action. The nobody had become undeniable, unshakable, and unstoppable. Looking back, the lessons were crystal clear. Patience, strategy, and calm authority were far more powerful than anger or rash action. True power lies in building quietly, observing carefully, and acting decisively when the moment is right. For everyone watching this story unfold, remember, your worth is not defined by how others perceive you. Your contributions, your efforts, your generosity, these are your true legacy. And sometimes, the ultimate triumph comes not from confrontation, but from letting truth do the work for you. If this story resonated with you, remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Let others see the power of resilience and quiet authority. Share your own experiences, and let's celebrate the victories of those who were once underestimated but refused to be invisible.